Okay, I think we're about ready to begin, right? Hello and welcome to our best practice forum, Measuring Your Program Maturity. A few housekeeping items before we begin. First, please make sure your mics are muted. Secondly, there will be a question and answer period after the presentations. But if you have any questions during the presentations, please type them in the chat box below. And lastly, the presentation slides as well as other handouts will be available after the presentation, but also in the resources box. Sorry about that. Resources box also below. And with that, we are ready to begin. So let's get started.
Hello, everybody. This is Pat Harned from the ECI. I'm hopeful that all of you can see me and hear me. And if you can't, make sure that you are somehow putting into the chat boxes that you're having technical difficulties or somehow I'm not coming through. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Best Practice Forum and to thank all of you for joining us. I also just want to take a moment and ask in advance for your patience with us as we're all, I know, encountering this strange transition to a remote environment. We have actually done live stream presentations before, but this is the first event that we have done at ECI that is 100% remote. So we welcome you. We ask for your patience if we have some glitches in the transitions, but we're just excited to have all of you with us, and we look forward to a rich conversation. Just by way of a little bit of background about what we are going to talk about today, I assume that most of you have probably had some exposure already to the work of the ECI and what we have done to begin thinking about quality and ethics and compliance programs. But in the event that you haven't, over the last several years, beginning in 2015, the ECI embarked on a real journey to try to explore and define what it means to have a program for ethics and compliance that goes well beyond the minimum standard. When companies really get it right, what does it look like, and how can we put some definitions around that? So after a series of papers and research studies that we've done, our community of practitioners have also been actively engaged with us in trying to define and develop a maturity model to look at program quality. And so the panel you have that will be working with you today are three people that have actually been part of a working group that has worked alongside the ECI staff and put in a tremendous number of hours to develop a resource guide for chief ethics and compliance officers, a white paper that we're really proud to be able to share with all of you and will be sharing with all of you after this event. You'll hear a little bit about it during this session today. So our three primary presenters have really done a lot of thinking, and in some cases even working directly with an assessment tool that takes the concept of a high quality program and puts it into practice to look at the well-being of an ethics and compliance program. And at the same time, we also know that we're hosting this event and talking about program quality and assessment at a time that is perhaps the most tumultuous time that any of us have experienced in our lifetimes. And so we certainly didn't want to take up the conversation about program quality and assessing the maturity of your program without also thinking about that question in the current context of the COVID-19 crisis. So about 2 weeks ago, the ECI sent out a poll to ethics and compliance practitioners, both within the ECI network, but also through social media. Got a tremendous amount of responses from folks telling us about how your companies are adjusting, the kinds of things that you're taking up to try to just be responsive to the current environment. And so we want to share with you some of the insights from that poll, and then also tie it back to this larger conversation about your program quality and how you can be looking at that within the current context. With that, I'm going to pass the baton, but before I do, I just want to tell you about the fine folks that you'll be hearing from this afternoon. So Scott Craddock is the Vice President and Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer with Core Civic. Bob Mascola is a Senior Director of Compliance Programs at Fordham Law School. And Paul Zickman is the Director of Global Forensics, Compliance and Integrity Service at Baker Tilly. And all three, as I said, have spent a significant amount of time voluntarily talking with the staff and working with us and exploring how we can help Chief Ethics and Compliance Officers and other practitioners to take this HQP work that's been ongoing over the years in our community and apply it through the form of an assessment for your organization. And from the ECI team, I'm pleased to have Everin Essen, who is our Vice President for Research and Analytics, who will be helping to lead the conversation at the end, the question and answer time. But I'm also going to immediately pass the baton over to Melissa Frazier, who is our Senior Survey Researcher and the person who champions all of our global business ethics survey work, and also the person who's worked with the poll that we just sent out about the COVID-19 crisis. So again, thank you all of you for being here with us today. We look forward to your input and your questions and your reactions. And with that, Melissa, take it away.
So I'm just going to jump right into these results today. So results from the ECI's Global Business Ethics Survey, or GBES, indicated that the higher the E&C program quality, the stronger the culture. Organizations with high quality E&C programs, also known as HQPs, demonstrate a 546% increase in culture strength over organizations at lowest level of E&C program quality. So looking at the graph that you see right in front of you, you can see the difference of HQPs shown here as optimizing, or it's the blue number all the way to the right, which is 84% compared to low E&C program quality, which is the red number at 13%. So as we just saw, the higher the E&C program quality, the stronger the organization's culture. The GBS results also indicated that the stronger your culture, the bigger your impact, meaning organizations with strong cultures are 467% more likely to demonstrate a positive impact on employees than organizations with weak-leaning cultures. This impact includes employees recognizing and adhering to organizational values, feeling prepared to handle key risks, reporting suspected wrongdoing, and reduced levels of misconduct overall. So what does this mean? In brief, high-quality E&C programs are important to an organization. The GBS data indicated that with HQPs, organizations have a stronger culture. A stronger culture has a positive impact on employees, which reduces overall observations of misconduct. So I'm going to switch gears for just a couple minutes, and we'll come back to HQPs. So ECI conducts a monthly pulse survey with its members that focuses on relevant topics to the ethics and compliance profession. For the March 2020 pulse survey, ECI looked at the novel coronavirus COVID-19. The survey was sent via SurveyMonkey to all ECI members. In addition, a separate link was created, and ECI placed the survey on social media outlets for our followers to participate. The majority of respondents, 55%, have worked at the organization for 6 months to 10 years and have an organization size of 500 to 50,000 employees. The top 3 industries were utilities, professionals in scientific and technical services, and manufacturing. So, pulse survey question 1. How prepared is your organization to handle the coronavirus? The majority of respondents believe that their organization is well prepared, 48% to handle the coronavirus. This is that red bar, that high bar you see. All Our next pulse survey question, how do you think a health crisis like COVID-19 will impact your organization's workplace culture? Results indicated that 38% believe there will be a great deal of impact. Important to note is that 0% of respondents believe there will be no impact. Every respondent believed there would be some form of impact. All right, next pulse survey. What level of financial impact do you think your organization will experience from COVID-19? Of those that responded, almost 1/3 of E&C professionals believe that COVID-19 will have a significant financial impact. That's that red bar you see. Our last pulse survey question, with the potential changes to your organization's workplace behaviors, policies, practices, such as telework, how meetings are being conducted, travel reductions, how do you think a health crisis like COVID-19 will impact your organization's ethical misconduct? More than 1 in 4 E&C professionals believe that misconduct will slightly increase. One more quick switch on you. I want to look at the GBES and coronavirus. While the coronavirus is a very different type of organizational change from those measured in the GBES, the impact may be similar. GBES indicated that as organizations experience increased incidences of change, this was based on 0 to 7 types of change occurring within the same year, the rate of observed misconduct also rise. So looking at your graph, you can see organizations that experience none of the types of change, that's your blue bar, 33% of employees observed misconduct. Whereas employees who observed 4 to 7 types of organizational change, that's your orange bar, 75% of employees observe misconduct. This means that employees working in an organization with many changes within 1 year observe misconduct more than 2 times as often. So let me emphasize, coronavirus was not in the 2019 questionnaire. It wasn't really there yet, right? But COVID-19 is having similar repercussions in 2020, where organizations are having to react quickly and undergoing many organizational changes all at once. So moving to 100% telework, more flexible working schedules, implementing cost-cutting procedures, measures, travel bans, and so much more information. So it is imperative that during times of organizational change, ethics and compliance does not get lost in the shuffle. So I know I just threw a lot of numbers at you and we went through a lot of graphs. So I want to do a quick recap. So first I'm going to look at the E&C professionals and their views on COVID-19. Almost 80% of E&C professionals indicated that their organization is prepared for COVID-19. 38% of E&C professionals indicated that COVID-19 will have a great deal of impact to their workplace culture. 70% of E&C professionals believe that COVID-19 will have a moderate to significant financial impact. And 31% of E&C professionals indicated that as a result of COVID-19, misconduct will slightly to greatly increase. It is GBS indicated that the more organizational change a company has within a year, the greater the rate of observed misconduct. So, as promised, how does high quality E&C programs or HQPs fit into all of this? The GBS data indicated that with HQPs, organizations have a stronger culture. A stronger culture has a positive impact on employees, which reduces overall observations of misconduct, and misconduct increases with organizational change. So think of your E&C programs, your ethics and compliance programs, as your foundation. As I think we can all agree, foundation's really important. So the aftermath of COVID-19 will be less impactful on your organization if your foundation is solid. So putting that into perspective, if organizations, your ethics and compliance program is solid, this will make your organization have less of an impact from COVID-19. So what I'd like to do today, we have 3 great speakers, as Pat pointed out, Bob, Paul, and Scott, who will tell us all about their experience with our HQP assessment and how they are using the results at the organization. But first, gentlemen, I would like to talk to you for just a few minutes about your experiences thus far with your organization and how you are handling this unprecedented pandemic. Bob, I'm going to turn to you first. Can you tell me how your organization is proceeding during COVID-19, along with considering the positive aspects, compassion and caring, along with some negative aspects such as risk or increase in fraud, and how your organization is combating that? Ooh. Bob, can you hear us? I'm sorry about that. All right, just a few technical difficulty. I'm going to move on to Paul. Why don't we pose the same question to you while we figure out Bob's background? Paul, are you there?
Hello?
Hello?
There's Bob. Can you go ahead? If you can hear me now, I can go.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, fantastic. So thank you very much, and sorry for the technical difficulties. As Pat indicated, we might have them. It is just the result of us all working remotely.
Yes.
So I am at a university, the law school, and so the COVID-19 virus has had a tremendous impact on the whole learning environment. And as many of you know, because you may have children who are affected by this, but schools have shut down and everything is now remote learning, and that's a huge transition. What I would say the positive impact for the organization is really that this COVID-19 has been an opportunity for leadership, and the organization, people in the organization, whether they're faculty or staff or students, may occasionally interact or hear from the dean. Now they're hearing from the dean on a regular basis. So this is really an opportunity for creating a whole tone at the top, to show compassion, to show empathy. And I guess the biggest takeaway for me is this is a tremendous opportunity to generate goodwill and loyalty among employees if it's done right. And if it's not done right, and I've heard some other stories that that are not my own, where it hasn't been done right, and you can lose loyalty that you built up over time if you're not handling the situation correctly. It has also been an opportunity for us to reflect on purpose. What is the purpose of our organization? And we've heard a lot in the past few months about corporate purpose, but we've had to adapt and think about how we're going to serve the interest of our customers, the students, and in this new environment. And that's made us think about, okay, what is our actual mission? Do we need to grade students or not? And so it makes you reflect on purpose, which I think is a useful thing. On the downside, I would say that there's a lot of anxiety for people who are at home in cramped quarters under a quarantine, and for many people wondering what the economic ramifications are for them. And so in that environment, there's a lot of stress that could translate into some misconduct. There's also less controls than when everyone is remote, and certainly that is true when you're talking about all students taking exams remotely. And what does that mean? And we're going to have to rely a lot more on the honor code than we would in otherwise environments, and we'll see how that goes, and maybe that will be a positive thing. So those are some reflections about how the coronavirus has impacted my particular organization.
One thing to kind of follow back on, I know there's a lot of organizations with us that are universities. Can you tell a little bit more about relying on the honor code and saying students taking exams remotely? Has there been any emphasis on that? Is your organization looking at ways to kind of mitigate those? Are they having students re-sign honor codes? Are they maybe putting more time tests so students have less time to maybe cheat or look for answers? Is there anything that you're doing maybe as a professor or in the E&C world or at your university to mitigate those?
So there are various measures that are being talked about. We haven't gotten there yet, but as part of that conversation, we will be talking about how to make the honor code more present to students when they are taking the exams. And I think most of us, or many of us, have heard the studies about how affirming an honor code before an exam or before any test decreases fraud and cheating. And so I think it's likely that we will adopt something like that, but we haven't had to, let's say, formulate what the mechanism for that is yet, because we're not used to that format for testing. But we will likely be introducing that element into our testing environment.
Wonderful. And do you have any additional comments about the organization as a whole, as the compliance program, as a senior director? Do you have anything as your organization for faculty, for staff that you're doing?
No, at this point, we're just at the stage that we are trying to show compassion and adapt. So that's the stage that we're at. There's also some thinking about controls and how we implement controls behind the scenes when everybody is working remotely. And that is not a part that I'm directly involved in. I think others on the call may be, so I'll let others speak to it. But that is the challenging part, because at this point, I think we don't know exactly where the weaknesses are. And those will become, I think, evident over the course of the next weeks and months. And we may be needing to adapt our controls to this new remote environment.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bob. I think it's great to hear that students are hearing more regularly from the dean and those positive aspects as well. So thank you for that. I'm going to turn it over to Paul. Same question to you. Can you tell us how your organization is proceeding during COVID-19, along with the considerations of the positive aspects and negative, and maybe some ways that your organization is mitigating those negative aspects?
Yeah, I think Bob mentioned a lot of great points, and I would reemphasize leadership has been a real critical element over the past few weeks. We've had daily updates from our CEO and other partners within the firm on what we as a firm are doing. We're in a bit of a challenging environment, because not only do we need to worry about our own employees as a firm, but as a consulting firm and a public accounting firm, we also need to worry about servicing our clients. And so we're really looking at this twofold. We've provided our employees with an overwhelming amount of information on how to protect themselves, how to stay safe, giving them an opportunity through webinars and Skype to communicate with our leadership, having a weekly happy hour, if you will. And I know that ECI has just done that as well, which I thought was a great idea. Just really giving folks an opportunity to speak about their concerns and really just talk. Now's a great time to reconnect and reassure folks. From the client's perspective, we've faced challenges in the sense that, we do spend as a consulting practice a lot of time with our clients, and traveling is certainly a critical element of our profession. Being unable to do that for the most part right now, we've found alternative ways to do that. And, I do believe that when we emerge from this crisis, we're going to see a lot of new business practices. And, one of the things that I'm seeing now is instead of delaying the opportunity to provide services, the ability to have web calls and Zoom meetings where, video is activated, where before most people were not, showing their camera view. Now we're seeing more of that, just so people feel connected. And I think we're beginning to see an increase in the speed of which services are being offered, because we don't have to wait, 1 or 2 weeks to travel. We can get together much sooner. So I think we're trying to make this as seamless as possible from a firm's perspective, but we're seeing much more in the area of leadership, and I think we will start to see that our own personal practices are beginning to change as well. So a lot of noticeable change, a very difficult time, as Pat commented earlier, it's unprecedented. But I think when we do emerge from this, we'll see a much stronger business environment. From the compliance perspective, I do believe that the risk of fraud and compliance failures is increasing. I think you'll see more opportunity for those types of events to occur with less management oversight. And we are seeing, unfortunately, a rapid decline in our employment rates. And so if we are basically creating an opportunity for more people to do more work with less people, those opportunities are going to continue to increase. We're starting to see signs that folks are undergoing more stress, more pressure, both personal as well as at work. And that environment, unfortunately, does increase the risk of fraud and compliance failure. So I think as ethics and compliance professionals, we're going to really have to have our finger on the pulse. We certainly don't like to think of those types of things at times like these, but unfortunately, we're already starting to see incidents where people are taking advantage of this unfortunate situation.
Paul, that was great. Thank you so much. I'm going to do the same question to you. Can you tell me how your organization is proceeding during COVID-19, along with considerations for the positive aspects and the negative aspects, and maybe some ways that your organization is going about mitigating those negative aspects? Scott, are you on?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Melissa. I appreciate the opportunity to share with the group today. So for those who are not familiar with Core Civic, a large part of what we do is in support of government partners at the federal, state, and local level with corrections, detention, and community corrections needs, including properties, programs, and services. So as you can imagine, the pandemic poses unique challenges to our company and our employees. As part of our ethics program, my team manages our human rights policy, which is a core aspect of our ethical framework. And so a lot of my focus right now is monitoring key decision-making processes and advising our leaders as they work with our government partners to try to manage the unique safety and health challenges that this pandemic poses. With other commitments and priorities, such as educational, religious programming in our facilities, and many other rights issues, for example. So that's really a unique, I think, aspect of what I'm focused on today. Also, many of our facility employees are considered critical infrastructure personnel who don't have the luxury of telecommuting or working from home. So our employees take great pride in the important public service that we support. So they tend to rise to the occasion and really shine in circumstances like this that require courage and dedication. But they also have anxieties, worries, practical concerns, just like everybody else. And it's really, I think, in these moments where our values of respect, dignity, and integrity are most critical. So my team is really involved in responding to concerns in these areas, as well as in how we are managing COVID-19 preparation and education in our facilities. And we're also working with our leaders to get the messaging right to respond to employee concerns and try to maintain professionalism at all levels. Finally, like Bob and Paul touched on, and I assume everybody else on the call, we're evaluating risk areas and asking questions about which risks could become more significant or accelerate quickly based on different ways this situation could evolve. An example would be if a large number of employees in a certain area of a facility operation such as the business office became unavailable, that could impact a lot of processes that tie up with our finance and billing areas and increase risk around that area. So what backup processes can we go ahead and start building in order to get ahead of that potential concern? We don't have it right now, knock on wood, but if that does come to pass, what is our backup? So those are the types of questions we're trying to ask from a risk perspective and work with other leaders in our company on.
Sorry, my mute was on.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Scott. We really appreciate that. Gentlemen, thank you for your insights to COVID-19 and how your organizations are proceeding during these unprecedented times. I would like to turn the presentation over to you so that we can learn more about how to assess our overall E&C programs. Bob, I believe you're up.
Fantastic. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, fantastic. So thank you very much. I'm going to be reporting on the working group paper that we prepared. This was a group effort. In addition to Scott and Paul, we had 5 others who were on it. So I just wanted to mention their names and thank them. So that's Jeff Benjamin, Linda Trevino, Karen Clapsaddle, Cindy Durkin, and Tim Linden. And it was a pleasure working with all of them. So when we set out with this project, we were all thinking about what are the particular questions that people in the ethics compliance field are asking. And we're all struggling with the question, how do we really know if our program is really effective? How do we know if we have the resources we need? Are those resources properly deployed? We may have an opinion, but who finally makes that decision? And if it's not us, how do we persuade somebody to make those decisions in the way that we want? Is our program keeping up with expectations and evolving risks? And then, if we have to, can we demonstrate that the program is effective? So these are all questions that are constantly on the minds of ethics and compliance professionals. And so we thought, how does program maturity fit in? So first of all, what do we mean by program maturity? Program maturity is simply an assessment of how well your ethics and compliance program is working, how well it's meeting objectives, and whether those objectives are set internally or externally. Now, program objectives, of course, will vary from one organization to another, but they all share common goals to prevent and detect misconduct and to build an organizational culture that encourages ethical conduct and commitment to compliance with the law. And those come from the sentencing guidelines. They're recognized by the Department of Justice. And to one extent or another, they're the foundation for our programs. Now, we know the word program maturity, or the term program maturity, by definition, just assumes that there is an evolution. And we all recognize that our programs need to adapt and evolve, and we work to improve them over time. So the idea is to do a snapshot of our ethics and compliance program to see where it is, where it needs to improve, and if it does need to improve, how do we know where it needs to go? So what are the benefits of assessing your program? Well, I would say, like any business operation, it's important to take a step back and measure how you're doing, right? And the holistic assessment of the type that we're talking about helps you identify where are your weaknesses, where you need more resources, what are your strengths that you need to continue. So is your program making good use of the resources? Are you effectively mitigating your risks? And then the fact that you are assessing your program by itself is a demonstration to regulators about the seriousness of your whole ethics and compliance program. Now, I wanted to pause for a little bit to talk about what's the framework for doing an assessment. Is it required legally? No, it's not required legally that any organization conduct an assessment, but there are good reasons to do it, and I wanted to go over them with you. So let's start with the federal sentencing guidelines. So in 2004, there was an addition made to the sentencing guidelines, and it talked about, or it suggested that organizations shall periodically assess the risk of criminal conduct and shall take appropriate steps to design, implement, or modify each requirement set forth in Section B, which is the 7 elements section, to reduce the risk of criminal conduct. So right there, it really, without saying it, suggests that periodic assessments of the program holistically is a good idea. And in the commentary on that section that was added, it makes the following. It states the following. Prioritizing periodically as appropriate the actions taken pursuant to any requirements set forth in subsection B in order to focus on preventing and detecting the criminal conduct identified under subsection A of this notice. So again, it recommends periodic assessments, and then it says, okay, now you've done the assessment, now you've got to modify your program. Well, you can't modify a program if you haven't done an assessment. And this is not just looking at where your risks are, it's looking at your program holistically. So what does the DOJ say? The DOJ guidance that we all turn to is based on the sentencing guidelines in many ways, but it elaborates. So it has a 3-pronged framework that I think you are familiar with. It asks, is the corporation's compliance program well designed? Is the program being applied earnestly and in good faith? And does the corporation's compliance program work in practice? Well, the working in practice prong has embedded within it this idea of a program assessment. So it says here, to determine whether a company's compliance program is working effectively at the time of a charging decision or resolution, prosecutors should consider whether the program evolved over time to address existing and changing compliance risks. So again, there is an expectation that your program is going to adapt, and an assessment helps you decide how it should adapt. One hallmark of an effective compliance program is its capacity to improve and evolve. So with these words, there's an expectation that regulators have, as embodied by the Department of Justice guidelines, that programs do need to adapt and evolve. Now, there is also the issue of Delaware case law that really relates to fiduciary duties for directors of an organization. There have been some interesting developments recently that I think have some bearing potentially on this. And without getting into the details of it, just a very brief overview. There is a general Caremark standard that's a famous case that some of you will be familiar with that sets forth the obligations of directors, clarifying what their fiduciary duties are in overseeing that an organization is complying with the laws. It set up a standard which was novel, but it was a very, very weak standard. And so there's criticism that that standard, the way it was articulated, led to a very check-the-box approach to compliance, just enough so that directors weren't personally liable. There are some, and that was from 1996, affirmed in 2006, so that's the way it was for a long time. 2 recent cases are suggesting that that standard might be developing some teeth. There was a decision at the Delaware Supreme Court in 2019, which is called commonly referred to as the Bluebell case, which related to a company that produced ice cream that had recalls relating to a listeria outbreak, and the court there denied a motion to dismiss that the company brought after a derivative action was brought, which is very significant. And the court said there is that the plaintiffs there had stated a real claim that the board hadn't met its fiduciary duties. And very few cases actually get past the motion to dismiss, and the fact that it did, I think, is going to get board's attention. There was also another case more recently at a lower court level in Delaware. I think similarly, these two in succession are going to get the attention of boards. And what those board members are going to be paying attention to is, do they have relevant information and reporting systems? That's kind of the term. And if they are getting information, are they taking action on that information? That isn't specifically saying that they should do an assessment. What I'm saying, though, is that the recent developments in case law are more likely to get boards' attention to compliance generally. Okay, so where do you begin? There are different ways to proceed with a program, you're assessing your ethics compliance program. You can do a self-assessment. You can do an external assessment. There are pros and cons. The self-assessment is certainly cheaper. It is less obtrusive. It's done by the people who know the best. On the other hand, if it's done in-house, there is a tendency to, or you have a concern about a self-serving bias, and it might be less persuasive in affecting change. When it comes to an external assessment, you might have more objectivity, although maybe not necessarily, depending on who the external provider is. That credibility might be very helpful in affecting the changes in your program that come out of an assessment. However, the cons are that it's more expensive. The external firm that's doing the assessment has a steep learning curve, and they may have a bias, their own bias. As an external consulting law firm or consultant, they may feel like they need to find something even if the program is in good shape. So, you have to make a decision first, is whether you want to do a self-assessment or external assessment. In either case, what's the framework? So there are different frameworks you can choose from. There's the sentencing guidelines, which we talked about, and the 7 elements there that in some ways are 8. And you can use them. They're a bit difficult to use for doing an assessment per se. The Department of Justice evaluation of corporate compliance programs, I think, does a better job of elaborating what an assessment could look like. It is, however, designed to assist prosecutors for how to evaluate a program after the misconduct has occurred. And it's not necessarily a holistic way to frame and plan that a proper assessment could be. There are other benchmarks. The Office of Inspector General has worked with the Healthcare Compliance Association to develop fairly rigorous models for assessing programs in the healthcare context. But there's also the ECI's principles and practices of high-quality ethics compliance programs that Pat mentioned at the outset, and that provides a basis for an entire framework. So at this point, let me turn it over to Paul to talk about the HQP framework in more detail and how that can be part of your program assessment.
Thank you, Bob. Good afternoon again, everyone. Start with just a high-level overview of the 5 principles. And although they are aligned with the guidance from the Department of Justice, I think what's unique to ECI's high-quality principles is the sense that they really focus on the organization as a whole around the alignment of these 5 principles in relation to the Department of Justice guidelines, but beyond that, other guidelines and principles that impact the organization's ethics and compliance programs. And so when we think about strategy and risk management and culture and speaking up and the ability to implement some level of accountability, these 5 principles are really, in my opinion, a foundation for any ethics compliance program. And we look at providing different levels of maturity for each one. So when you think about your current ethics and compliance programs, are you at an underdeveloped level of maturity, or are you optimized? And one of the things that we'll talk about in a few moments is you may not be at the same level of maturity for each of these principles, and that might be by design, or it might be because you have opportunities to improve your program. So when you think about strategy, are ethics and compliance really embedded within the business environment? And from a risk assessment perspective, as we know today, everything is really driven by that risk assessment. So have you identified those relevant ethics and compliance risks that are impacting your organization? Are those risks owned and managed by individuals assigned with that level of responsibility within the organization? And how are you, as ethics and compliance professionals, designing your program to mitigate those risks? When you think about culture, as we know today, we often hear the saying that culture trumps compliance any day. We know that the importance of culture is driving the success of all of our programs. Without the right culture within the company, without the organization building a culture of integrity, it makes our job as ethics and compliance professionals much more difficult. It also makes the ability to implement an effective program much more difficult as well. So where do you fall from a cultural perspective? Speaking up, as Melissa alluded to early on with some of the survey results, creating that culture of transparency and encouraging employees to speak up when they do have concerns is of the utmost importance for any ethics and compliance program. And where do your organizations fall when it comes to the ability to encourage speaking up? And then once employees do speak up, what are you doing to respond to those concerns? And are you holding people accountable for their actions? And is that accountability sustained over time, and is that implemented in a consistent manner? And when we think about the levels of maturity, Optimize is really a leading practice program. And in addition to being leading practice, it's also a program that shares the results, benchmarks with external organizations such as ECI and or other industries and companies within their competing space, if you will. Managing is a very high level, and I will say that in my experience as an ethics compliance professional for over 30 years, I see a lot of companies, are operating at certain levels of maturity in certain parts of their program, and they have opportunities to improve upon others. So it doesn't mean that all 5 principles are going to be at the optimized level. There could be certain levels that are at the underdeveloped or developing level, defining level, while others are more advanced. That said, if we look at the principle 1 in a little bit more detail, we can see that from a strategic perspective, looking at the underdeveloped all the way up to optimizing, just how embedded is strategy, is the E&C program within the strategy of the company? Where do you fall? And if I would ask all of you to take a look at this slide, and if you had to answer this on an elevator speech, if your CEO said, hey, you're our ethics and compliance professional within the organization, where do you think we fall? This is one area where you can review these high quality principles and look at the different levels within your company. Obviously, we don't want to be at the underdeveloped where it's really non-existing or not foundational. A defining level of maturity within within principle 1 under strategy might be something that is more established within the organization, but it's not really embraced throughout all of the organization. Here I would reference examples where you might have a business unit that ethics and compliance is embedded within their strategic goals and objectives, but other business units may not be as advanced. When you come to the next level of maturity, which is adapting, here we start to see that the elements of an ethics and compliance program are more embedded within the company, and you're starting to see certain levels of accountability. And that is really where you're starting, in my opinion, to turn the corner. And you're moving up to, the management level all the way up to optimization. So think about how the assessment of your ethics and compliance program can really help you determine what level of maturity you're at. And when you think about why you would want to know that, there are multiple reasons, but we've listed a few here for you to consider. One of the things that I really like about this assessment is it uses a very practical and common sense approach. And these principles are, although they are aligned with, some of the guidance that Bob just mentioned, most specifically with the Department of Justice and other guidance that Bob mentioned, they are principles, right? And they're really easy to discuss with your leadership. And it's not just the guidance that's important, it's how are we operating as a company? Where do we fall within these certain principles? And you can apply this to any area within the company, all right? It can be any type of organization, small, medium, or large. It can be any type of industry. And more importantly, it allows for what's stated here is cross-functional or multi-geographical assessments. And what that means is essentially that if you want, you can assess a geography. You can assess a business unit. You can assess a department. You might want to understand what the ethics and compliance program are like within the HR department or the legal department or a specific business or function such as sales. So it's really can be as broad or as focused as you would like it to be. You can benchmark your results. ECI does an excellent job of maintaining the database of results so that you can share with companies of similar size or industries and sectors. And so that, to me, when I worked internally and we looked at our results, we were able to compare it not just within the company, but outside of the company. And I'll tell you in a moment why that is so important. When you think about making those plans or designing those plans for continuous improvement, the best thing about this is that it's a roadmap, right? It's a roadmap to get from point A to point B. So if you want to be at a managing or optimized level, and your assessment shows that you are really functioning at a defining or adapting level, it provides you with an easy roadmap to follow of how to get from point A to point B. And to me, that's one of the greatest benefits. And when you sit down and you talk with leadership about the results, you can have an easy conversation with them about here's where we are, here's where we think we need to be, and here's how we get there. So that said, when you're planning your assessment, what factors do you need to take into consideration? Well, number one, what type of version would you like to use? ECI has made this very user-friendly in the sense that you can have a standard version, a process version, or an enterprise version. So a standard version is a single questionnaire. It can be used by one person who provides the responses, or it can be used by one person who gathers responses from multiple people. But it's very limited. It's one questionnaire, and the results are going to be limited as well. The process version allows up to 50 participants in 4 different segregations, and that provides a little bit more level of input from many more individuals. Or you can use the enterprise version, which is up to 100 people, 10 segments, and there you can get a much broader view, if you will, within the organization. That said, you want to determine who should complete the questionnaire. And one of the things that we encourage is to choose participants that are most related to or impacted by the ethics compliance function. These are folks that should have some knowledge of the function or some level of interaction, because there you're going to get an unbiased response. And that's one of the things that you want to make sure that you avoid, is that you don't want this unconscious bias where the results are skewed one way or another. It's almost like, if you're an employee who has gone through a 360 review you want to make sure you send out that questionnaire to people that work with you, people that maybe have managed you or that you have managed, to really get a holistic view. You don't want to send it out to just those folks that that are going to hopefully provide you with positive comments. You want to get an unbiased response. And then last but not least, when you think about the communication plan for launching the assessment and communicating the results, you want to make sure that the Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer, perhaps the CEO or the General Counsel, they are stressing the importance of this survey. Someone needs to really be a champion, if you will, for the assessment. It's almost like anything else. We've all been part of projects within our respective organizations, and we want to make sure that people participate and they provide legitimate responses and they take it seriously. That encouragement and ownership and support from leadership will go a long way to making sure that those results are what you're looking for. And then last but not least, what do you do once those results are obtained? The first thing you're obviously going to do is assemble a team. Hopefully it's going to be led by the Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer. You might also want to bring in some cross-functional representation, legal, HR, maybe someone from the business to help you assess the results. And then you want to identify where you want to be as an organization. You may like the fact that you are at an adapting level or a managing level. You may realize that, look, based on the risk profile of our organization, we don't need to be optimizing in certain levels. Or, by opposite, you might need to be at the optimization level. So you need to decide where you want to be from a maturity level perspective. And then from there, you develop that action plan. And the greatest thing about the action plan is that you are going to have a roadmap that's going to provide you with how to get, again, from point A to point B. Moving to discuss the results with leadership, and then refining the action plan based on their input. And then from there, it's very simple as implementing an action plan with periodically reporting on the results. So with that said, I think Scott is going to take over from here to provide his input as to what they've done at CoreCivic in their use of the HQP. I'll hand it over to you, Scott.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Bob. You guys have getting a little feedback there. You guys have done a tremendous job in setting the table here and describing both the background and rationale for the assessment and also how it works. So I'll tell you a little bit about our experience at CoreCivic. We have utilized the assessment tool starting late last year and into early this year, and it's been very helpful for us. So a little bit more about the company. We're a diversified domestic publicly traded REIT, about 15,000 employees, 79 operated facilities, 29 leased facilities. You can learn more at the website. And then my team is 7 members, including myself. We're an independent function that reports to the CEO and the board risk committee. And we have what I would call a sort of diversified compliance within the company, in the sense that we have an operations, quality assurance, and compliance function, and an HR compliance function that reports separately within different reporting lines. So more about our ethics program also on the website. So, one thing I would mention at the outset is we have used the HQP framework since it was first published as a way to, as a lens through which to see our program and as a resource. And we've educated folks over time about it, both at the board and executive and officer level. So my hope is that we have done a good job of familiarizing people with the HQP over time. And we wanted to test that to some degree. So we wanted to both get an assessment from folks, like Paul mentioned, who would have contact with the program, who would understand what the ethics compliance program consists of. We also wanted to use it as a tool to continue to educate folks about it, that in taking the survey, they will that will reinforce their learning about what what an ethics compliance program consists of, and all of that. So we chose to survey our Executive Ethics Compliance Committee. So that's a group of roughly 15 folks, our executive team plus officers in cross-functional disciplines, as well as some subject matter experts. We also surveyed everybody on the ethics compliance team, and then there were other selected leaders and subject matter experts who are not part of the committee, but that we felt like we interact with a lot and that they would have a good perspective on the program, or at least a segment of the program. So for example, our learning and development leader is not on the committee, but we interact with him a lot. We wanted to get his perspective on the program. So that's really the who and the why. Like I said, we rolled out the survey late in 2019, and we were really focused on preparing for our board report, which happens in late February, and also going into 2020 with our Ethics Compliance Committee meetings. So what you have on the screen now is a sample of HQP assessment results. I'll just point out, these are not core civics results, and this is not exactly what our report looked like, but it does show you and represents a basic shot of the spider chart if you haven't seen it yet, if you haven't taken the assessment at a conference or through some other mechanism. This is what the spider chart looks like. That shows all of the 5 principles and according to the underdeveloped to optimizing spectrum that Paul laid out. So it gives you a simple visual representation that you can show to somebody, and it sort of automatically helps explain to them without thumbing through 10 pages or a long slide deck of sort of where you are. The other piece that we laid in was the benchmark data. So you can see your results compared to current benchmark data. That's very useful. And then you can also have a visual representation of how different groupings within your company that took the survey assess the program. So you might find that one group assessed the program at one level and another group assessed it at another level, and that then you can explore, well, what does that mean? So for example, in our case, our executive team rated assessed the program slightly better on all indices than the ethics compliance team assessed it. And so my initial reaction to that was, that's fantastic. That the executive group thinks very highly of our program. That's very positive. As I reflected on it, I also thought, well, maybe that means we're not calibrating our reports to them at the right level. Maybe we're being too rosy. Maybe we're being too positive and optimistic, and not communicating everything we think we know in some areas where we know we need additional results. And some that may or may not be true. We'll see over time. It also could be just that, certain groups, including that group, are looking at it at a very high level. We are very in the weeds. We dealt with something yesterday where we know we need to improve. And so, and that's reflected in the results. But it is very useful, I think, to look at those different cuts, even down to an individual level and a small group level. So we looked at our legal group, those participants who took it, our HR group. We also looked at the officer group as a whole, and it tended to reflect, as you might expect, where they interacted with the program. They tended to know more and more, I would say, accurately assess it. And in other areas where they might not interact with it, they would assess less. So the other thing you can do through the report after you take the assessment is look at each principle, and within that principle, each of the particular areas that there are questions around. So the one on the screen now relates to risk management. And so you can see that there are questions around different areas of risk management, risk calibration, risk identification, gap recognition, monitoring of risk, employee support relative to risk areas, and third-party screening. And again, you can get through the reporting process, or at least we did, a spider chart for this principle. So that will show you on each of these different areas where you're strong, where you're weak, where you may want to mature the program. This also, so this risk management, the reason I chose that one for this particular presentation was that this was a very interesting one in terms of our results, and that most of our results tended to be pretty consistent around all of the different areas, but this one we had some particular, I would say, immature areas. Fortunately, we did know that, and we're working on those areas, but it really validated what we thought, and so it made for an interesting visual. But it also provided an opportunity for us to check specific areas against other folks in the organization, and that can be telling. So, for example, if third-party screening, if you're working on that, if you feel like it's immature and not developed, but everybody else rates it very highly, then that may mean A, people don't understand what you should be doing, or B, you just haven't done a good job of educating folks about what you need to do in third-party screening area. And one of the reasons I like the HQP framework so much overall and use it quite a bit is that if you use the measurement framework and really go through the materials, they provide not just principles, but real examples, and they make conversations with business partners across your enterprise often a lot easier, because you can have some practical things to say. Here's what I'm talking about. Here's what we're doing, why we're doing it, and here's an example of what we're talking about. So risk management, as I mentioned, was a very interesting one for us, and I think also tied in with what we thought. So what are we doing with the assessment results? So one, we're assessing our program, as you would expect. We're also, we have reported to the board on program maturity and effectiveness. One of the questions that I'm sure your boards have asked you is, how do you know you're effective? How do you know you're being successful? So this, we kind of framed our program report for the year around this and some other dashboards around effectiveness, and is very helpful in providing an objective look. And one of the things I think a lot of us struggle with our board reports, executive reporting, is hitting that right balance and being balanced in your reporting. And this provides an objective viewpoint with benchmark data that can help you do that. So the other, as I mentioned earlier, really educating and enhancing the feedback we get from our Ethics and Compliance Committee. We want that committee to be engaged. To be engaged, that committee has to understand what we're doing, why we're doing it. So again, I felt like participating in the assessment, then getting the report would be another way to educate and enhance feedback from that group. Obviously, as part of the assessment, identifying areas to focus for enhanced maturity, and then testing and refining our program management and project plan. So we have those in place already. And so we wanted to test that. Are we focused on the right thing? We take inputs from our ethics line, from our risk management processes, from incidents, and we build out our project plan and we update that. Are we on the right track? Are we over-focused, for example, on things we already do well, and maybe under-focused on things that we need to mature, and that the board and Ethics Compliance Committee have told us we need to mature? This is a good way to test, are we on the right track? And then the last thing we did, we went through some other self-assessment process to compare and test the results. So we wanted to take a broad look at our program, and we wanted to make sure that we weren't being myopic. Again, as I said, we've sort of used the HQP framework for a lot of our program development. So I didn't want to be myopic and say, well, okay, you've built your program around this, you should test highly, but maybe there are other assessments out there where you wouldn't quite fare as well. So we wanted to compare to other self-assessments that are out there, which we did. So what have we learned so far? I've covered a good bit of that along the way here, but one thing we've learned is that our overall assessment was consistent generally between our team and other participants. There were differences between subgroups and individuals, as I mentioned earlier, but as a whole, pretty consistent. So that from my perspective, tells us that people understand what we're doing pretty well, and they are seeing things pretty consistent with the way we are. And the other points on this slide I've already mentioned in terms of individual assessments and the executive team, so I won't go further on that. The other things that we've learned are that the assessment results generally did track with our project plan. So for the most part, we understood what our low maturity areas are, we've identified them, and we have things working on them. I will say that there were some, takes on those low maturity areas that we hadn't really thought about, and that this kind of gave us some insight into and said, okay, maybe we need to expand something we're doing, but overall pretty consistent. And also the HQP assessment results were pretty consistent with the other program assessments that we took, and highlighted similar opportunities to enhance program maturity. So that was good. I mean, I think most of these assessments are built around the same building blocks, and so it's not entirely surprising, but it was good to see some consistency around the results and areas for continued development. Again, we have shared these results with our board and our Ethics Compliance Committee. It's been very helpful. The spider chart is a simple and effective visual tool to show program maturity against the HQP maturity model and benchmark data, and also to compare the assessment results of different subgroups. So it really, I think, is easy to digest. And then our board in particular and our executive team really appreciate having a benchmark to compare us against, and say, okay, we're mature over here versus the benchmark. Here's an area where we want to, we think we need to improve, and does everybody agree with that in terms of what our focus areas ought to be from a maturity perspective? So I have been very gratified in terms of the response we've gotten from the board and executive team. The other thing we've done is, as I mentioned, refined and tested our project plan. Then that's going to help us build toward greater maturity in the future, and then really build understanding and buy-in from our stakeholders in the program into both what we're doing and why we're doing it. So it's been a good experience so far. We have quite a bit to go, and look forward to continuing to use the results going forward. So I think that is the majority of what I wanted to cover today, and I will turn it back over to Melissa.
Thank you, gentlemen, again for your participation. Alyssa, I am turning it over to you.
Thank you so much. Before we begin our Q&A, we have two little things. One, I know a number of people had some trouble logging on, so I just want to assure everyone that the presentation will be available on demand. And secondly, we have a short video from our sponsor, Conversant. Starting now.
Hello, everyone. I am Everett Essen, the Vice President of Research and Analytics at ECI, and I will be moderating the question and answer portion of today's Best Practice Forum. We've received quite a few questions already, and if you have more, please send them in. I will go to the first question that we received, and this is related to the COVID-19 environment that we're currently in. One viewer had a question directed more towards Paul than anybody else. And the question is, it seems as though we are seeing regulations, the enforcement climate rapidly loosening in this climate. How do we as ethics and compliance officers manage through this so our employees don't think that the reins are completely off? Paul, would you like to start?
Sure, it's a great question, a great observation. Certainly with the new stimulus package, we're going to see an influx of cash into our economy. But I think that any perception that regulations are sort of either declining or becoming less onerous is incorrect. I would say that in this time, anybody that perceives that the regulatory environment to be weakening or less onerous is certainly false informed. I think that it will be highly regulated. I know that they yesterday appointed a new inspector general to oversee the stimulus package and the release of funds and monitoring those funds. I think that companies need to now be more vigilant than ever around, being in compliance with laws and regulations, because I certainly can tell you that from my experience in working with the government and now in industry for 30 plus years, no one is going to allow you to use the excuse that that the coronavirus allows you to be less compliant with laws and regulations. So I think as an ethics and compliance professional, it's more important for us now to stress the importance of adhering to ethics and compliance. It's important for us to be getting those messages out to our employees. I mean, realizing that people are stressed, that they are overwhelmed at this point, dealing with not only their job requirements but also family matters as well. But it's important for us to keep that message out there, because I don't think anybody from an employee perspective should be misled that the laws and regulations and the requirements imposed by those are weakening.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Would anybody else like to answer that question? No? All right, then the remaining questions are related to the HQP discussion. And so one question we received is it really necessary to have an external assessment, or is this something that can be done internally? Can you assess your program internally through other means than a kind of standard assessment?
I'll jump in, Everett, on that one. It is not necessary to do an external assessment. It's not legally required. It's a judgment call, and it depends what you want to get out of the assessment. It also depends on your budget, and depends on the credibility of your internal assessment. One of the benefits of this HQP assessment tool, self-assessment tool, is that it gives even an internal assessment an objective, tested framework that's easy to apply and communicate. So I think that gives a greater weight and it gives a greater advantage to an internal assessment. There are times, however, where the risks to an organization are such that the government is going to expect an external assessment. So, for example, if the organization has been involved in some significant compliance violation, the government is going to expect that there is a full assessment by an outside party, because the fact that the company itself was involved in some sort of violation suggests that any internal assessment may not be credible. And so you have to ask yourself, what is the purpose? If it's to show to regulators, would regulators view a self-assessment as suspect? And I think that in some circumstances, some limited circumstances, it's worth paying the extra money for the external assessment. Where it happens, I think some companies will do an external assessment every 5 years, maybe every 7 years, because it's so expensive. But you don't want to wait every 5 or 7 years to do an assessment. And in the interim, you can be doing these self-assessments. But again, no clear rules. It's a judgment call to be made, and you have to weigh the pros and cons that we discussed.
Okay, thank you very much, Bob. And I'd also like to mention that for ECI members, access to the HQP assessment is part of your membership. If you're an organization level member, if you're a fellows or a senior fellows. So that's part of your overall membership. And there's not an additional fee to have ENC teams participate unless you go above a certain number. And so if you would like more information about that, please reach out to hqp@ethics.org. All right, so for the next question then, we have a question that asked, can you explain more about how the maturity descriptions were created? So the different maturity level descriptions. Would anybody like to answer that? If not, I can chime in.
Evan, why don't you respond? Because none of the three of us was involved in creating the different levels. So if you could,
I was. I was part of the. Go ahead, Evan. You can, and I'll chime in after you. I was part of the team that wrote that.
Well, why don't you go ahead, Paul?
Yeah, I think that we went back and forth with because when you look at maturity models, there's so many. We talked about are there 5 levels, 7 levels, 3 levels. We really wanted to come up with, different levels of maturity that showed, starting with nothing, and initially the term that we used was sort of ad hoc, but, we went with, the levels that we have now based on the input from the entire team. We came up with 5 because we thought that, more than that was too many, and less than that, everything was going to be sort of merged into the middle. I think it was not only defining, the difference between the foundational and underdeveloped to optimized, but providing within those levels of maturity all of the different elements that needed. That was the most difficult part. It actually wasn't coming up with the names of the levels of maturity, from underdeveloped to optimized. It was coming up with, what are the elements within each level? Because as we sort of populate those levels, there was some overlap between the two. Certainly getting to the end between optimized and managing, really what does it take to get your program to that optimized level? So, we went back and forth several rounds of different names, and those were the 5 that we came up with, from really having nothing to starting to implement some level of a program to, the managing piece where you've got a strong program in place. You just need to go that little bit extra to come up with an optimized program. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's sort of our thought process when we were coming up with those different levels of maturity.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Paul. Also, to get more information on the HQP and to access the working group paper that Paul mentioned that goes into details about the maturity levels, you can go to ethics.org/HQP, and you'll be able to download that resource as well as the Blue Ribbon Panel report and other reports that are related to HQP. So we have time. I'm sorry.
I would just go one step further in saying before I would absolutely consult with both of those before even launching an assessment, just so you can familiarize yourself with what's in that Blue Ribbon report and really what is considered, a high quality program from underdeveloped to defining to adapting to managing all the way up to optimization. Because at the end of the day, when you get those results, you're going to want to make a decision as to where you want to be on that level of maturity. And I'm sure Scott alluded to that as what they did with the program. If you don't understand that, it's going to make it more difficult for you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Paul. I think we have time for just one last question. This question says, you mentioned the importance of having a strong culture of integrity and accountability when reviewing the 5 principles. As culture is more qualitative in nature, do you have any suggestions and best practices for measuring culture as part of your program assessment? Scott, would you like to answer that one?
I think that mention was probably from Paul when he was going through the principles, but I mean, I can tell you that the assessment includes questions around culture and folks' views on where your culture is. So that's built into the assessment. And that's one area, in fact, where we have really want to get to the next level of maturity. And so the things we're looking at in terms of measuring it internally, our culture, that is working with our HR team on a culture survey that they're leading, and then supplementing that with a culture survey that's focused on the ethics, compliance, cultural elements specifically.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anybody else? Would you like to add anything? All right. Well, to learn more about ECI's HQP assessment, to learn about ECI's culture assessments, I refer you to our webpage. And with that, we are going to end our programming. So I would really like to thank all of today's speakers. Thank you, Bob, Paul, Scott, Pat, and Melissa, for all of the useful and insightful information that you shared. Thank you to Conversant, our sponsor for this event. Also, for anybody that's been on the webcast for 50 minutes or more, you will automatically receive an email with your CEU credits. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Stay safe, everyone, and see you at the Impact Conference later in April.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.